In the life history of Bob Dufresne, as told by him to me, in his young school days in Brainerd, Minnesota, he was not noted for his academic prowess. With his usual wry humor, he did allow that in retrospect, he did feel sorry for his junior high school teachers. World War II, and I'm still with you, Jeff. World War II changed his attitude towards study and learning. He graduated from high school in the famous class of 42 and enlisted in the Navy in July of that same year. Sometime after this, he completed 36 weeks of airborne radio and radar school. In a surprise move, he actually liked to study. He eventually ended up on the island of Guam, and later, because pilots in the Pacific needed constant replenishment, he was sent to flight school in Texas. Does that have to go down further? Is that better? Thank you. Before he could complete his pilot studies, the war ended and he was discharged from the Navy in December of '46. However, he continued to study, graduating from St. Cloud State Teachers College, as it was known at the time, with a major in social studies. He next found himself teaching in Austin, Minnesota, in junior high, where he also coached basketball. He was going circles. He remained interested in the educational process throughout his professional life. He received a Master of Education and a Doctor of Education in Education Administration and Political Science. Bob went on to join Mankato State University as Associate Professor and later became a Director of Teacher Education in Kearney, Nebraska. From there, he came to Winona in 1967. Bob loved teaching, and even as president, he managed to sneak into the classroom to teach a few political science classes. As for the learning part, he wanted to remedy his incomplete pilot training, so at WSU he finished flight school under the tutelage of George Woolen. After stepping down from the presidency, he took on a number of assortment of tasks at WSU. He increased his teaching hours and enjoyed every minute of it. He served as an interim basis in several administrative positions, and he delved further into the history of WSU, and I can truthfully say that he wrote the book on it. Bob was in charge of the Studies Abroad in England program, in which students from WSU would attend an English school for a semester. We often went with them to take the students over and get them settled, and there were times that I thought we were in London more often than we were in Minneapolis. Local politics as well as the international scene fascinated. As far back as 1955, he went to Turkey for 3 months as a goodwill ambassador. Among his many other travels abroad, he went to East Germany when it was still East Germany. He went to Russia when it was still the USSR, and even took the train to Outer Mongolia. As one of many optimists, he was part of the Association for Uniting the Democracies, an organization which at that time was advocating the union of European countries into one entity. Bob also took the local political thing seriously by running for state legislature. He lost. He ran for city council. He won. And that's how our paths crossed. As a new city council member, he had to visit all the city departments. I, at the time, was library director and consequently a city department head. We talked, and later, well, that's a story for another time. All you folks that live in the PAC might be interested to know that Bob was also a musician. He once sang in a barbershop quartet, and I heard a recording of them, and I can honestly say they were very good. He admitted to me that he did play the accordion. but sadly, I never heard him. He had the courage to learn to dance, and even danced at our wedding. Somewhere along the line, he took up the cello of all things, and was apparently good enough to play in the Carnegie Symphony Orchestra. And he did say that the conductor soaked his bowl before performances, but I'm not entirely certain of that. I can certainly say that he played a mean harmonica and could just pick it up and play. In his last years, when he was at St. Anne's, he would bring his harmonica to the common area and play the old familiar tunes. Everybody loved it. Robert Dufresne was truly a gentleman and a scholar. And now, I would like to introduce to you another Dr. Dufresne, although he would probably prefer to be called Jeff. Who followed his father's footsteps into the mine of the education field.
Well, my father would have been pleased, probably somewhat surprised, to be honored by having the Performing Arts Center have his name attached to it. He was always a great supporter of the performing arts, which is probably why he was drawn to his wife, who was an accomplished pianist and dancer. He also might have suggested that working in college administration was sort of a performing art in itself. He said it involved a lot of acting. He said when he first started, he sort of had to act like he knew what he was doing. And that could well be. In some respects, it's remarkable that he attended college at all, much less becoming president. And as she said, he wasn't much of a student in high school, at least so he thought. World War II changed that. And for those of you who are young enough to not be aware of it, a short history lesson. During World War II, the enrollment at colleges and universities just collapsed. And it was because of the huge number of young men who were going off to join the service, and the very large amount of young women who were out taking jobs that men had been fulfilling before them. So, if you're a college administrator, what do? Well, it's a good idea to contract with the military to do training programs and things of that sort. And so that's how he wound up actually at, I think he wound up at William Jewell College in Missouri, and then later St. Mary's out in California, taking these training classes through the Navy. And then when the war was finished, you had the GI Bill. And at that time, anyway, the government thought it was a good idea for people coming out of service to get further education in college. They thought it might be good for the country generally. So he took advantage of that opportunity. It wasn't the main focus of his education, but certainly he was very involved in choir and music, that sort of thing. Church choirs. He was in barbershop quartet. He even started piano lessons as a kid, but the Depression kind of put the kibosh on that. So he later took up the accordion, which had some connections, I guess. When I was in junior high school, he, I hesitate to use the word forced, but he encouraged me to take up the cello and play in the orchestra. I was somewhat resistant at the age of 13. So he thought maybe it would be a good idea to encourage me if he also took cello lessons at the same time, and did. It was never very clear to me if that was for the sake of encouraging me or just because he wanted to take the lessons himself from Hans Schmittau, and so he did, and wound up playing in the orchestra, and I think in Mankato, certainly in Kearney. I'm pretty sure I was a much better cellist than him. I'm not sure that really says very much for either one of us, but at any rate, he was a very great supporter of performing arts. We go to concerts and things like that. He felt that was a way of sort of counteracting what he thought was the sort of the coarsening of our culture over time. He grew up in a time when, before there was no TV and certainly there was no YouTube or anything of that sort, and so people had a tendency to learn music, to play music, to entertain one another, to entertain each other, to play in church, and things of that sort. Virtually all churches had choirs, and at the very least pianists and organists, that sort of thing. I was kind of shocked actually a few years ago when I wound up going to a church and they had a karaoke machine. They had a karaoke machine, apparently because there were no pianists available at the time. And so I found that odd. And I think this happened pretty fast. In 1972, I started working in St. Paul at Highland Park, which was kind of it was an excellent school. And at the junior high school, when I was there, they would put on musicals with a full orchestra, with 2 casts, and fill the auditorium for a week. That was 1972. As things go in St. Paul, I was transferred from school to school for a while, and when I wound up coming back about 15 years later, there was no orchestra, certainly no musicals, and they had a band with about 18, 20 kids in it. That was about it. So this happened rather fast. And in talking to my dad about that, I said, well, how does that happen? Is it just money or what? And he felt that certainly there was some money issues, but that the fact that there's so much TV and people could see professionals on TV, on computers, on now telephone, that by comparison, the average person watching that stuff couldn't compete. And so they became watchers or consumers of music and acting and that sort of thing, rather than participants. And I think there's probably a good point there. It certainly has happened fast at any rate. But I'm sure that given the center, the fact that he sees young people now who are so very, very interested in performing arts, music, acting, drama, everything, that he would be extremely proud to have his name attached to this Performing Arts Center. That's it for me.
There are 3 individuals who were responsible for getting this initiative started, and I'd like to invite them all to the front. They're going to say a few words. So George Boland, Gary Evans, Jim Reynolds, come on up. And as they're coming up, I want to recognize a couple of our foundation folks. George is on our WSU Foundation. Bob Strauss, right in front of me, is our chair-elect. Real Reuter, where Real? There you are, right in front of Bob, as well. I didn't see our other board members, but I do want to recognize Real and Bob. Now, for all of you who know these 3, for them to speak for 1 minute each is going to be a feat. So my staff said that they were told they had 1 minute. I'm like, okay, yeah, right. You don't know these 3. So I do want to thank them for the effort that they made in getting this initiative started, in making it something that needed to be done. As the president said, probably overdue, but something that needed to be done. So George, I'm going to let you kick it off, and I'll let you.
No, I'm at the end.
Okay, all right. So you want longer, I get it. All right, Gary or Jim, which one? All right, Jim, you're first.
Gary Evans and George Boland.
Thank you, Ron. And I want to thank all of you for coming today to recognize Bob posthumously by renaming the PAC in his honor. It's been 50 years looking at the clock on the wall of the PAC, 50 years since the PAC opened. That was 4 years into Bob's presidency. It's been 42 years since Bob completed his assignment as our 10th president. It's been 5 years since his death. And during those decades and since, there have been hundreds of dance, music, theater performances put on in this space. And literally thousands of people have enjoyed the performances presented there. This is a long overdue recognition, and it is entirely fitting honor that this building be named for Bob and his contributions. Personally, I arrived at Winona State, what was called Winona State College in 1969. That was 2 years after Bob began his presidency here. As a new young faculty member, there were occasions on campus when I was able to interact with Bob and visit with him, and special moments where he provided the kind of encouragement and support needed for me to chart a course as a new faculty member here. For this, I remain in his debt. Beyond my personal interactions with Bob, though, his 10-year history as president was a remarkable period of leadership resulting in significant institutional change, academic program expansion, no fewer than 8 academic programs spanning the 5 colleges here that he helped to create. A remarkable period of physical plant expansion, no fewer than 7 new buildings and 2 major renovations during his tenure. And a remarkable record of enrollment management. He saw a boom period in enrollment here, then he saw a leveling and a stagnation for a period of time, which motivated him to propose at that time something that was called the External Studies Program, and George may have more to say about that. Now that program is known as Adult Continuing Education, but it was a remarkable and very timely innovation on Bob's part that really boosted enrollment at that time and saved what could have been some pretty severe cuts to the university. But among the most notable institutional changes, I think, that took place was the transition from Winona State College to Winona State University with a remarkably expanded mission and differentiated mission to serve the region, to serve the state, and to serve the nation that continues to this day. This is a legacy that I think should be honored and celebrated, which is why we are here today. So, to conclude, I want to thank the Faculty Senate. I want to thank Student Senate. I want to thank all of the constituent groups on campus, the current administration, for supporting this initiative to rename PAC in Bob's honor. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues in retirement, George Boland and Gary Evans, for joining me in making this recommendation and moving it forward in Bob's honor. And my thanks to all of you for coming today.
Well, I don't think I need the mic. I want to point out, though, Jim, thank you. 59 seconds on the head. That was wonderful. I'm very honored to be here and to be mentioned as one of the 3 retirees who brought this forward. In reality, my colleagues George and Jim did that. But I want to tell you how very flattered I am to be here and how very long overdue I believe this honor has been. I also want to tell you about a career that Bob Dufresne never had, but should have. After Bob had retired and I had done the same for the first time, I'd get a call every once in a while saying, have you got a golf game today? And usually I was foolish enough to say yes. I want to know how Dr. Dufresne found out about my lack of golfing prowess. Because whenever he called after the 3rd time before committing to play with him, I checked my wallet. That kidding aside, though, he was one of the neatest gentlemen, and I use that term affectionately. He was a very gentle man until he got on the golf course when he was competitive as a barracuda. But he was a good friend, I think a great president to this place in days as we've been told that were difficult. I was at the newspaper at the time. Vietnam was waging, and it wasn't an easy time to steer a steady course for a higher ed institution, and yet he did it with excellence as he did everything. And so I'm grateful to be here. I'm glad all of you are here as well. Barb, it's been long overdue, but it's finally getting done. Mr. Vogt, Dr. Vogt.
I don't know. Hey, thank you, Gary. First of all, I want to thank Jeff and Georgia for being here at this event. And of course, Barb, it's a great day. When you're at the end of the ceremony, you can say all sorts of things and nobody can correct you, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So there'll be some facts here, but we'll put them around a little bit differently. But thank you for being here. There's a gentleman, there's 2 people here. First of all, I want to thank Barb and Jeff and Georgia for their patience in getting this accomplished. But President Olson picked up the baton, and Gary's absolutely right. We just rode on the coattails of this guy right here. This is a Jim Reynolds, President Olson project, and they got it done. We just happened to have a ride. 1968. Interesting year. One-shot Kelly. Now, Fred knows this. Fred was here. Vivian was here. I was here. I don't know if anybody else was around in '68. But we had 64 new faculty members and administrators come to this institution. Phase 1 of the union was built. Phase 2 was being built. One shot had to take 2 shots of the new faculty because they were sitting up on the steps that went into the student union at that time, and that's how many of us were. We're going to jump and come back to, I think it was the 2nd week of October, 1968. A beautiful day. But I'm going to pull back. Hilda Muley. Now, Hilda Muley was the president's secretary. And if Hilda didn't like you, you were not going to see the president. That was just how it was. All right? If he called you, you'd get in, but if she didn't like you, Hilda ran the show. All right? But you could walk in to the president's office, and all of a sudden, you would hear this string music. Because when you went into the president's office, where presidents Olson's desk now was a chair. And next to that chair was the cello. And periodically he would be out there playing the cello, believe it or not, 1968. So his attachment to this building is big time. So in October of 68, second week, this was just a square block. There were a row of wooden garages in the back. That's where the motor pool was. Okay? And they were terrible garages, but. And we had the groundbreaking ceremony for this building at that time. That was the first shovel that was turned by President Dufresne on the original building. Wayne Smith, who was the architect, was the local guy that took care of it. The building turned out great. There's some stories about that, but I'll tell those maybe privately later on that you can laugh at. But when I think of President Dufresne, and I'll bounce back and forth, and I want you to think about this. Words. What words best maybe describe him? I think of husband. I think of father. I think of principled. I think of visionary. I think of quirky, funny, pretty good tennis player. People don't remember that. Gary learned he was a pretty good golfer, but what he did with the golf game, you guys know, is he would pick his opponents. Now, when he played tennis, that wasn't the way it was, okay? So I want you to know that. Had patience. Had real patience. Had the ability to listen, which I don't. 50 minutes in the classroom ruins you, all right? But he could listen, had a sense of timing that you couldn't believe. He's the president that took some heat from where he worked because he got in front of the band of individuals that were walking down Broadway protesting the war. Who would have done this? What president would have done this? The sense of timing of the external studies program. Had that in the back of his mind, but couldn't get it through because it wasn't the time. But when the enrollment went down and we had to lay people off, that was the time he brought that forward, and the faculty and the community came together and we got that, and that helped bridge us, and now it's gone over to big things. There was a childlike part of him, and Vivian knows this better than I do. But when, and I think I got this pretty close to being right, one of the first shows that was done here by Vivian was a children's show, and I think it was Peter Pan. I may have been wrong about that. She's mad at me about that. But Peter Foy, who flew the original Peter Pan in New York, came here and did the collegiate flying, and Jim Danaker, am I right, Jim? Was I'm right about you got flown by Peter Floyd, right? You were the first one. All right, what year was it? Was it one of the what? Well, see, I missed. But what Dufresne would do, what Rad would do, he would come over here and he'd sit in the theater with all these kids. There'd be 500 plus kids in this theater, which the fire marshal said there could only be 450. All right, they were double seated, and he would come in and he would be totally amazed about how this stuff was going on, and he would talk in the middle of the thing. He'd ask Vivian questions, and she'd say, "Shh, be quiet, let's just get this over with." But then he would sneak back over during that week when we would be having 2 and 3 groups of children coming to campus, and he would sit in the audience, and he would be the child that he really was. And that's, a really big tribute. I'll tell you one story that happened right about where the gazebo was. And this is an administrative story. This is a 1969 story about G. Theodore Meetow, the first chancellor of the system. For whatever reason, I was invited to some meetings, and we were walking across to lunch to phase 2 of the student union. And the vice chancellor for academic affairs comes up about that spot and says to the chancellor, "Chancellor, I have these meetings with all the vice presidents for academic affairs." Provosts were not in at that time, folks. And we have these meetings, we all agree upon how we're going to handle this. And he said, Don Warner comes back to Winona State, he meets with Dufresne. Dufresne and he decide what the heck they're going to do. And they sometimes, and most of the time, don't do what we've agreed upon in St. Paul. And I remember this just vividly. And G. Theodore stopped right about there, and he turned to Gary, not that Gary, turned to Gary and he said, "Gary, did you read the Minneapolis Trib today?" And Gary said, "No." And he says, "Well, I read the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, I did not see a single article or issue about Winona State University. Leave them alone." You wish you had that nowadays, don't you? So, in kind of conclusion, you know, he wasn't a very good motorcycle mechanic, which is another story. He was a very, very good aviator because of who he was and what he did, and it was special. So, to all of us who knew him, and to those of you that have been a benefactor of everything that he set out, we are all better persons for having known Robert A. Dufresne.
Barb and family, if y'all would come here to the sign, President Olson.